I'm honored today to be joined by Pastor Mark Biltz, who is the founder of El Shaddai Ministries in Washington State. He is a well-known and popular commentator on the Feast of the Lord. He is also well known for his discovery of the blood moon tetrads that shook the church community and changed our understanding of end-time prophecy. Mark has authored several best-selling books, including the one we're going to be talking today, which is Blood Moons, Decoding the Imminent Heavenly Signs. And Pastor, thank you for joining me here today.
Well, thank you so much. I love being on your program with you.
Well, we did a great show last week, and we were talking about the Antichrist, Decoding the Antichrist, one of your books, one of your excellent books. Now, you, as far as anyone that I've ever talked to, you're responsible for discovering the blood moon tetrads. And, you know, the book of Joel talks about blood moons. Jesus said there'd be signs in the sun, moon, and stars and all of that. But your book here, Blood Moons, Decoding the Imminent Heavenly Signs, how on earth did you find out about the blood moon tetrads?
It was a miracle. It really was. I love astronomy. And so I was looking at the eclipses, and I had been praying, and it happened, it hit me about 4 a.m. when I was in my prayer closet. I used to love to get up and pray around 4 and 5 in the morning, and I've been doing it for a long time. And I also teach on the Feast of the Lord. And so all of a sudden it hit me, I need to go to NASA's website to look at when these eclipses are occurring on the biblical calendar. Because in Genesis 1:14, many people misunderstand that verse, which is so significant. When we think of why did God create the sun and the moon, we think it was for light. But the Bible says the number one reason, go and look in Genesis 1:14, he created the sun and the moon for signs. And then it says for seasons. Well, the problem is English. When we read the word season, we think of winter, spring, summer, or fall. But that Hebrew word doesn't mean that. As a matter of fact, in Leviticus 23, when it talks about the feast of the Lord, that word feast, what do we think of when we think of feast? We think of food. Well, it's the same Hebrew word. So how can that Hebrew word, the same one, be translated as food here and winter in Genesis? It doesn't mean either one. It literally means an appointed time. That's why the biblical calendar for the Jewish people was based on the new moon, because it's on the new moon is the only time you can have a solar eclipse. And that's why the feasts like Passover and Tabernacles are on a full moon, because you can only have a lunar eclipse on a full moon. So God's calendar isn't the Muslim calendar, the Gregorian calendar, it's the biblical calendar. And so I made that connection, and then I go back and I look, and you wouldn't believe it. The first blood moon happened on Passover. The next one was on Tabernacles. And there was a solar eclipse on Rosh Hashanah, for heaven's sake, 2 weeks before the other lunar eclipse. And then in the next year, there also was a total lunar eclipse on Passover and Tabernacles. And I just was so shocked. I thought, well, how often does that happen? And I looked, and the time it happened before was 1967 and 68 when Israel captured Jerusalem. And the time before that was when Israel became a nation, 1949, 1950. And the time before that was 1492 when all the Jews were kicked out of Spain. And so I just was blown away, and I knew that it had to mean something. And I would never claimed that I knew what it meant, but I knew it had great biblical significance.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's just, when I first read your book and began to understand the blood moons, you know, when you read Joel and it says the moon will be turned to blood, the sun will give its light, it's like, you know, the sky's going to fall, you know, I mean, but that's not what it's saying.
No.
It was saying that there will be signs, like Jesus said, in the sun, moon, and stars. And so the blood moon tetrads makes perfect sense, because that's what God does. You know,
exactly.
I mean, and he's so orderly, he's so predictable in that sense. So I want you to talk about the seasons, because you were talking about the feast. Now, one of the things that you teach that is so fascinating is on the Feast of Israel. Okay, so you believe that the Feast of Israel, 7 feasts, 4 in the spring, 3 in the fall, you believe that's a prophetic grid. You believe that that's a prophetic statement about the future, right?
You are exactly right. In Revelation, it talks about those written in the book of the Lamb who's been slain from the foundation of the world, not 2,000 years ago. That means the slaying of the Passover lamb was from the very beginning, from the foundation of the world. As a matter of fact, what I believe the Father said is, look, I'm going to send my son to die. I'm going to determine what day he's going to die. I'm going to determine what time he's going to die. As a matter of fact, I'm going to determine what songs will be sung at his funeral.
Wow.
This is why 1,000 years before Jesus came, King David wrote the funeral hymns that would be sung on the day Yeshua died, because every Passover they sing the Psalms, the Hallel. As a matter of fact, many of your listeners know that they sang a hymn and went over to the Mount of Olives out on that night. I can tell you the words to the song they sang, because they sang Psalm 118 as the last hymn at every Passover Seder. So the very words that they sang before it was betrayed and crucified has the verse, this is the stone the builders have rejected. It's become the headstone of the corner.
Oh my gosh. So you have Passover.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have unleavened bread.
Right.
Okay. Which was the burial.
Right.
And then you have first fruits.
Exactly, the resurrection.
All of those have been fulfilled.
On the day.
On the day.
On the very day.
And then you have the Pentecost, which happened 50 days.
Oh.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the Jewish. And so now those have been fulfilled, but now we have 3 that haven't been fulfilled. And so talk about the blood moons, talk about the significance of the next feast, because we were talking about the last program. This next Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, could be very significant. Talk about that.
Oh, very significant. Now, if your listeners believe the Lord is the same yesterday, today, and forever, not just in their head, but in their heart, they know he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. If he fulfilled the spring feast to the day of his first coming, he'll fulfill the fall feast to the day of his second coming, which is why we need to know when they occur on our calendar. And just like you can't have Pentecost until he rose from the dead, he's not going to rise from the dead until he's buried. And they're not going to bury him until he died. They're going to be fulfilled in order. So the next feast to be fulfilled is the Feast of Trumpets. Well, do we hear anything about trumpets in Revelation? Of course we do. And so the next feast, Yom Kippur, is Israel's National Day of Atonement, the very day when their blinders will be removed. They'll realize Yeshua is the Messiah. And then the next feast is the Feast of Tabernacles, where God tabernacles among men for the 1,000-year reign. Now, the Feast of Trumpets, which is the very next one to be fulfilled, okay, it's also known as Yom Teruah, or the Day of the Awakening Blast. That's right. There's all kinds of scriptures that prove the resurrection of the dead, the rapture, if you want to call it that, will happen on Rosh Hashanah.
I mean, some year, we don't know the year.
Some year, I don't set dates. I don't know what year. See, I have no idea. But I know what will happen on Rosh Hashanah some year.
Well, I totally agree with that. And see, and the thing is, for years I heard that Jesus could come at any time. Well, he couldn't die at any time.
Exactly.
See,
exactly.
He had to die on Passover.
Right.
And so to say that the rapture could happen any year.
Yes, there you go.
And because it's a 2-day feast, it could happen any of the days. You know.
Well, not only that, it's 2 different days every day in the world.
Yeah.
We have 24 time zones. How can anyone know the day or the hour when there's at any one time there's 24 different hours?
Well, that's what Jesus said in Luke 17. In that day, there'll be 2 men, or in that night, 2 men be one bed, 2 people in one bed, one taking one left. In that day, there'll be 2 men standing in a field, because it'll be night some places and day some places.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So and it's going to happen around September. That's the English here. But around September of the year, there's going to be the Feast of Trumpets, and there's going to be the rapture, the resurrection of the dead. Now and there are also other names that you talk about when you talk about Yom Teruah, the awakening blast, all this stuff. But also it's the wedding day of the Messiah.
Yes, it's also the coronation of the Messiah. It's the day he's going to be crowned King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And in Leviticus 23, these feasts were called convocations, which in Hebrew is mikra, which literally means a dress rehearsal. So I ask people, do you want to be at the wedding of the Lamb? And they go, yes. I say, then why don't you want to be at the dress rehearsal? That's where we learn our part.
Yeah. That's amazing. So let me go back to 2014 and 15 because we're talking about the blood moons.
Sure.
This is just such a significant point in time in human history that we're looking at. And what I say to people, Pastor, is, every generation has had a sign or signs. Hitler was there, earthquakes, wars, but we're the only generation that has all the signs.
Exactly.
We have especially Israel, but we have a convergence of all the signs. So going back to Christopher Columbus, who was a Jew, and many people don't know that, but here's the way I've seen the blood moons, because there's 1492, 1493, 1949, 1950, 1967, 1968, and then 2014 and 15. So we understand the first three. But here's the way that I look at it. The 1492 and 1493 was the beginning of God bringing his holy people together. This is the first time since the AD 70 that we see the first beginnings of a gathering there. 1949, 1950 is the Holy Land. The Jews get back the Holy Land. 1967, 1968 is the Holy City of Jerusalem. 2014, 2015 that's the one, to me, is the Holy Temple. There has been, since in the last 3 months, there's been 11,000 Jews ascend the Temple Mount to pray, the most since 2,000 years ago. Okay, and so we're seeing a great activity in Jerusalem, the Temple Institute, the Temple Mount Faithful, different people. So what do you think about the feast of 2014 and 15? What do they mean? Is it significant for the temple? Does it have any other significance?
I think it definitely could be temple related. The way I look at it from hindsight, I did mention this back then as well. But if you remember Joseph's dream, and Joseph was a type of the Messiah, there was 7 years of plenty followed by the 7 years of famine. I believe the 2014-2015 lunar tetrad was a warning of the 7-year cycle. When it ended, we would begin the 7-year famine or tribulation, which is why 2022 is so significant.
Okay, so the Shemitahs, and if you wouldn't mind talking about it again. So this is a Shemitah year that we're in right now.
Yes.
Now, when we say 2021, 2022, the Jewish year begins, and their civil year begins the Rosh Hashanah.
Yes.
In September.
Yes.
Okay, so their new year began in September, and so now between now and next September, this is a Shemitah year. This is the 7th year.
Yes.
And you believe now again that the tribulation has to begin at the beginning of a Shemitah cycle, which is next September.
Exactly. And I have a chart here. One of the things that I want to mention is how significant the first year of a Shemitah cycle is, and which will begin October of next year, right after Rosh Hashanah, because we're in the 7th year. But did you know both temples, Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the temple and Rome destroyed the temple, both in the first year of a Shemitah cycle?
Wow.
So both temples were destroyed then. The 1967 Six-Day War happened in the first year of a Shemitah cycle. The Yom Kippur War happened in the first year of a Shemitah cycle. Israel took out the Iraq nuclear reactor in the first year of a Shemitah cycle. The first Intifada was in the first year of a Shemitah cycle. The Israel-Jordan peace treaty was the first year of a Shemitah cycle. That's when the quartet began that wanted to divide the land. And I believe they represent the 4 horns in Zechariah that keep the land divided. And then the Gaza war and, of course, the stock market crash also happened the first year of a Shemitah cycle. And then we have the 2014-2015 blood moons, which was the end of a Shemitah cycle going into the beginning of a Shemitah cycle. And one other point I want to make, You can only blow the shofar on the year of in the year of Jubilee. Now you got to remember, there's 49 years or 7 cycles. The year of Jubilee is always the first year of the next Shemitah cycle.
Right.
Well, 1973 Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur is the day they blow the shofar announcing the year of Jubilee. On Yom Kippur. And then we have the Yom Kippur War. Well, I believe that was probably a Jubilee year, which means next year also is a Jubilee year.
Oh my gosh. So you believe if the tribulation does not begin next year, it has to wait till the next Shemitah cycle?
Exactly. It has to begin because Daniel's Jewish.
Sure.
Okay. Well, too often Christians see the 7-year time period, they know, but it's not any random year. It can't start today. It can't start, on any Rosh Hashanah. It has to begin the first year of a Shemitah cycle.
So the next year being the beginning of a Shemitah cycle and Jubilee.
Exactly.
I mean, that's
huge.
just huge.
This is huge.
Yeah. And so, when you talk about the Shemitah year, you're going by the Jewish calendar.
Of course. And
Yes.
the way we know it's a Shemitah year is the Hebrew years divisible by 7. It's really simple.
Yeah. And I heard you say that one time, and it embarrassed me. It was so simple. I was like, why didn't I think of that? But so next year is a huge, huge year, and that's what you're saying. Yeah.
I tell you what, all your listeners need to get ready.